Namaste to everyone. A very grand welcome to this weekend's Mahabharat. This is weekend number 15 and Indian history class number 14. If you see in the last class, that is Indian history class number 13, we were discussing about the part 1 of Vedic literature. So Vedic literature we were discussing about. Part 1 means, as I have said in the previous class, that Vedic literature actually it has 10 different components. So all these 10 components together called as the Vedic literature. In the last class, the first part of this among all these 10 components, the first part, that is Vedas, we discussed in our last class. So just a 2 to 3 minutes recap of the last class, and then we will move on to the today's, that is the remaining components of the Vedic literature. So what we were discussing in the last class? Vedas. In the starting of the class, we discussed the introduction about the Vedas. Like, the word Veda, actually it came from a root word Vid, which means knowledge. And we discussed even that these Vedas, actually they are oral compositions, they are not written. That's why this complete Vedic period is a part of the prehistory, Indian prehistory. It is not history. After Vedic period starts the history, from where human records, direct human records exist. So that's the difference between history and Indian prehistory. So because Vedas were oral compositions, we discussed in the last class that they are to be read and to be memorized, not to be written and read. They are to be taught and memorized. That means they are to be heard and memorized. That's the reason we said Vedas were also part of the Shruti literature and Smriti literature. Yes or no? That means to be heard and to be memorized. And in the last class we also discussed there are 4 important Vedas we had. The Vedas are 4 in number. They are Rig Veda, Samaveda, Yajur Veda and Atharva Veda. And we also discussed that the first 3 Vedas, Rig Veda, Samaveda and Yajur Veda, are called as Trayi or Trayo. And important point was that Rig Veda, the first of all these 4 Vedas, was composed in the early Vedic period, that is 1500 BC to 1000 BC. But all other 3, Samaveda, Yajur Veda and Atharva Veda, composed in the latter Vedic period, that is from 1000 BC to 600 BC. Now, just a small brief conclusion about 4 important Vedas. What we discussed in the last class, Rig Veda. So we discussed that Rig Veda was divided into 10 different mandals. That was the oldest religious book in the world. And Rig Veda contains around 1028 hymns we discussed. And these 10 different parts of the Rig Veda are called as mandals. And in the 9th mandal we had Soma, that is called as Soma mandal. It was dedicated to God Soma. And in the 3rd mandal of Rig Veda we had the great, very popular hymn, that is the Gayatri mantra we discussed. And in the last mandal, that is in the 10th mandal of Rig Veda, we discussed in the last class that it explains about the caste system. That means the Purusha Sukta in the 10th mandal of the Rig Veda, which explains that there was a god called as Brahma who created the humans, and from the mouth of the Brahma came the Brahmanas, from the shoulders came the Kshatriyas, from the thighs of the Brahma came the Vaishyas, and from the foot of the Brahma came these Shudras. So this is the way how the Rigvedic 10th mandal, that is the Purusha Sukta, which justifies the caste system. And we also discussed very important point that to understand the very complex Vedic Sanskrit, which was the original language of composition of the Vedas, common people don't understand that. That's why every Veda was associated with a commentary. That means simplified, some text which explains the Vedas. And I said, what are they? They are Brahmanas. So Rig Veda was to be read with which Brahmana? Aitreya Brahmana. We discussed it. And then we discussed Samaveda, which was the oldest book on the music. Sam means melody. And we also discussed most of the hymns of Rig Veda were borrowed from, most of the hymns of the Samaveda borrowed from Rig Veda. And what was the Brahmana to be read with Rig Veda? That means which text explains the meaning of the hymns of Samaveda? It was Udgatri Brahmana, we discussed. And regarding Yajurveda, we discussed that was the book which explains about the process and the procedure of performing the sacrifices or rituals. And we also discussed that what was the Brahmana which explains the hymns of the Yajurveda? It was Adharyus Brahmana. Brahmana means it is a text which explains the meaning of the hymns. And we also discussed that Yajurveda was divided into two parts. One part was of poetry and another part was of prose. So the poetry part of the Yajurveda was called as the Shukla Yajurveda and the prose part was called as the Krishna Yajurveda. So about the last Veda, towards the end of the last class, we discussed the Atharva Veda. What is Atharvaveda? Atharvaveda was the book of magical spells and charms. So that was like the most ancient book, oldest book on the medicine or healing, magic healing. So we also discussed that was also called as the book of Veda of magic formula. And the most important point about Atharva Veda, we discussed it towards the end of the last class, that Atharva Veda was not a part of the Trayi. Trayi contains only the first three Vedas: Rig Veda, Samveda, Yajurveda. So what was the Brahmana which was to be read to understand the hymns of the Atharva Veda? I said in the last class it was the Gopath. So by this we ended in the last class. The first portion, the first component of Vedic literature among the 10 different components, that is the Vedas, we discussed. But Vedas are not only called as Vedic literature, part of Vedic literature. There are lot many texts which belongs to the Vedic period. And now in today's class, that is in the weekend number 15 and Indian history class number 14, we discuss the remaining Vedic literature part. Now, first of all, let us have some brief introduction. What are the contents that we are going to discuss in this class? Once Vedas are completed, there are 9 different components left to be studied of Vedic literature, which are combinedly called as the Vedic literature. So what are the 9 different components? Let us first list out them and then we study each of them, one by one. After Vedas, the second component of Vedic literature was Brahmana. So almost I have given some information on Brahmana, what is a Brahmana, etc. But we have to discuss in specific. So Brahmanas were the second component of the Vedic literature. And then third component of Vedic literature was Aranyakas. So Brahmanas we have to discuss today, Aranyakas we have to discuss today. And the fourth component were Upanishads. Very, very important point, sir. Upanishads. For India, Upanishads contributed a lot to the Indian philosophy even. So Upanishads we have to discuss. They are the fourth important component of the Vedic literature. And the fifth important component of Vedic literature were Vidangas. So we have to discuss Vidangas also. There are 6 Vidangas we have. What are Vidangas and what are those 6 Vidangas we discuss? And then the seventh component of Vedic literature was Smriti. So Smritis, there are 4 to 5 Smritis we had in this Vedic period. They are part of the Vedic literature. So that Smritis, for example, Manu Smriti, you might have listened. So these Smritis we have to discuss today. And then Darshan, the 9th important component of Vedic literature, that is the Darshan. So what is Darshan? Actually, in Indian philosophy we had 6 different schools of thoughts. So 6 important Indian philosophical domains we had, and all these 6 schools of philosophy are combinedly called as Darshan. So what are the Nyaya, Vaisheshika, Sankhya philosophy, Yoga philosophy, Mimamsa philosophy, Uttara Mimamsa? So like that 6 Indian schools of philosophy we had, and they are combinedly called as Darshan. So we have to discuss the Darshan, a part of Vedic literature. And the last and very unique and very important texts which comprises the Vedic literature, without which Vedic literature is incomplete, and they are epics. So we were having two important epics belonging to this Vedic period. They are Ramayana epic and Mahabharata epic. So in brief, with just like an introduction, we discuss what are these two epics also. So this is the structure that we are going to discuss today. Brahmanas, Aranyakas, Upanishads, Upvedas, Vidangas, Smritis, Darshan and epics. Now, let us discuss the second important component of Vedic literature after Vedas, that is Brahmanas. So as I have said, Brahmanas, what are Brahmanas? Brahmanas are the texts which explains the inner meaning of the hymns of Vedas. Why? Because Vedas are composed in Vedic Sanskrit language. They are composed in Vedic Sanskrit. So Vedic Sanskrit was the language of Brahmanas, who were dominant section in the society during this Vedic period. But the common people did not understand that complex language, Vedic Sanskrit. That's why the hymns of the Vedas were simplified. The meaning of the Vedas were explained in some other texts, and these texts were called as the Brahmanas. So we understood, right? Brahmanas means they are the text which supports or which act like a commentary or which explains the inner meaning of the hymns of the Vedas. That means for every Veda we are having some different one and sometimes more Brahmanas. To every Veda these were to be read along with. Now let us see, for Rig Veda what are the Brahmanas, that means which explains the meanings of Rig Veda, Rigvedic hymns. For Yajurveda, Samveda and Atharva Veda. First Rig Veda. For Rig Veda, as I have already said when we were discussing Rig Veda, Aitreya Brahmana is one of the Brahmana which explains the hymns of the Rig Veda. But not only Aitreya Brahmana, there is another Brahmana also which explains the hymns of the Rig Veda, that is the Kaushatki. Very important, sir, Kaushatki. So this Kaushatki Brahmana also explains the hymns of the Rig Veda. So what are the two Brahmanas associated with Rig Veda? Aitreya Brahmana and Kaushatki Brahmana. Now Samaveda. During Samveda I explained Udgatri Brahmana was the text which explains the hymns of the Samveda. Udgatri Brahmana. But not only Udgatri Brahmana, there are two more important Brahmanas which explains the hymns of Samaveda. They are Jaimineya Brahmana, very important, sir. Along with Udgatri Brahmana, Jaimineya Brahmana also explains the hymns of the Samaveda, and Panchavish Brahmana. Panchavish Brahmana. This text also explains the hymns of the Samaveda. So for Rig Veda, Aitreya and Kaushatki Brahmana. For Samaveda, we had Udgatri Brahmana, we have Panchavish Brahmana, we have Jaimineya Brahmana. And now Yajurveda. For Yajurveda, already we discussed Adhuryu's Brahmana was the text which explains the meaning of the Yajurveda. But along with that, there are two more important Brahmanas which explains the meanings of the hymns of Yajurveda. What are they? One is Adhuryu's Brahmana, and then Taitreya Brahmana. Aitreya Brahmana explains the Rigvedic hymns, Taitreya Brahmana explains the Yajurvedic hymns along with the Adhuryus. And then one more is there, that is Shatpat Brahmana. Shatpat Brahmana, very important Brahmana, sir. This also explains the hymns of the Yajurveda. I said Yajurveda was dealing about what? About the procedure of performing the sacrifices, rituals. So this Shatpat Brahmana explains that portion of Yajurveda which speaks about 10 sacred baths. 10 sacred baths to a Hindu. So Shatpat Brahmana talks about the 100 sacred baths, not 10, I am very sorry, 100 sacred baths. For example, during the last rites, performance of the last rites of parents, we will take a bath. During our marriage, before marriage, we will take a sacred bath. On the day of Shashtipurti, we will take a sacred bath. Like that, throughout the life cycle, this Yajurveda preached to a Hindu to have 100 sacred baths. And this Shatpat Brahmana explains about that. This is Yajurvedic Brahmanas. What are they? Adhuryus, Shatpat Brahmana and Taittiriya Brahmana. And the last Veda, that is Atharvaveda. So for Atharvaveda, what is the Brahmana associated with? There is only one Brahmana which explains about the hymns of Atharvaveda, and that is Gopat Brahmana. Gopat Brahmana. So this is about the Brahmanas. Just a small conclusion. Brahmanas are the commentaries or which explains the inner meanings of the Vedic hymns. For Rigveda, we had Aitreya Brahmana and Kaushatki Brahmana. For Samaveda, we had Udgatri Brahmana, Jaimineya Brahmana, and then another one was Panchvish Brahmana. For Yajurveda, we had Adhuryus Brahmana, then we had this Shatpat Brahmana, and also Taittiriya Brahmana. And for the last one, Atharvaveda, we had Gopat Brahmana. This is about the Brahmanas, which is the second component of the Vedic literature. Now, let us discuss about the third component of Vedic literature. What was that? Aranyakas. Aranyakas. So what are Aranyakas? They are also part of Vedic literature. What are Aranyakas? So the word Aranyakas, the root word is Aranya. In Sanskrit, Aranya means forest. So by logic, by the term, word itself, it knows actually that Aranyakas are the books of forest. So they are the forest books. They are the first forest books which were written in the Vedic period. Now, another important point about Aranyakas is, who wrote these Aranyakas? Brahmanas wrote Vedas, Brahmanas, Upanishads, Upvedas, etc. But who wrote these Aranyakas? Brahmanas were living in the villages, and in the latter Vedic period, smaller cities. But forest, to know about forest, one should live in the forest. So who might have written these forest books, Aranyakas? Yes, the persons who were living in the forest. Who lives in the forest? Saints will live in the forest. Sannyasis will live in the forest. Sadhus will live in the forest. So it was the religious discipline of Hindu religion that one would pursue a solitude life in the jungle. And when they are in their course of pursuing that solitude life, alone life, soul life inside the jungle, they would understand everything about the jungles. That's why those people who know Vedic Sanskrit, they composed some books on the forest. Who composed these Aranyakas? The sadhus, the saints, and the hermits. We call them as hermits. Hermits means those who live in the forest. They wrote the Aranyakas. Now, what Aranyakas actually deal about? Vedas deals about different things. Rigveda deals about something, Yajurveda deals about something, etc. Brahmanas, which explains the hymns of the Vedas. But what are Aranyakas about? Sir, these Aranyakas explain about the mysticism and philosophy. Mysticism. Why mysticism? Because who wrote these Aranyakas? These saints, sadhus who were living inside the jungles, soul life, alone life, who are seeking peace, who are pursuing the penance. They composed these Aranyakas. That's why the Aranyakas deals with the mysticism, spiritualism, and the philosophy. Now, another important point about Aranyakas. Sir, the people who wrote this, they outrightly condemned the sacrifices. They opposed the sacrifices or ritualization of the Hindu religion. Brahmanas in Vedas and in Brahmanas, they promoting the sacrifices. For example, Yajurveda was for that only. But these Aranyakas, in an opposite perspective, Aranyakas oppose the sacrifices. And last important point about Aranyakas is, Aranyakas also deals about the meditation, mysticism, philosophy. Along with them, even they deal about the meditation. So this is the Third important component of Vedic literature, they are the Aranyakas. They are the forest books. They were written by the hermits. Hermits means sadhus, saints, and those who live a solitude life in the jungle. They wrote them, and they opposed completely the sacrifices, and then they spoke about the deal about the mysticism and philosophy. At last, they also spoke about the meditation. So this is about the Aranyakas. Now, the fourth important component of the Vedic literature, fourth component, very important component among all. After Vedas, now the most important component is Upanishads. If you know, every Indian should actually, whatever the philosophy that is prevailing today of our nation's philosophy, whatever, for example, like Satyameva Jayate, like that, some phrases you will listen, and all the philosophical content of India was actually the foundation laid in this Upanishads. So now this is the fourth important component of the Vedic literature. Let us study about the Upanishads. What are Upanishads and what they speak about, who wrote them, etc. Upanishads, fourth important component of the after Vedas, then Brahmanas, then Aranyakas, now Upanishads. Sir, if you see the literal meaning of the Upanishad, what actually this Upanishad means, the literal meaning is to act near to someone, to act down to someone, or in other word, if I have to explain the word Upanishad, it means a student sitting before a guru. That means it's a symbol of seeking something, questioning something. So it's a symbol of questioning. That means philosophical thoughts. So Upanishads, the literal meaning is that a student sitting before a guru. That actually this Upanishad denote about. The word Upanishad means a student sitting before a guru. Now, sir, Upanishads, what they question about, what they seek about. If you see the Upanishads, they actually laid the foundation for the Indian philosophy. As I have said, there are 6 schools of Indian philosophy: Nyaya philosophy, Vaisheshika philosophy, Sankhya philosophy, Yoga philosophy, and then we have Mimamsa philosophy and Uttara Mimamsa philosophy. For all these 6 schools of philosophy, the source, the foundation was Upanishads. So Upanishads laid the foundation for Indian philosophy. Now, if you see Upanishads, in the Upanishads, they outrightly condemned, just like the Aranyakas, Upanishads outrightly condemned the huge ritualization of the religion, huge sacrifices, huge rituals. They outrightly banned them, they outrightly preached not to practice them, they opposed the sacrifices. So Upanishads condemned the sacrifices. And very interestingly, if you see, these Upanishads, they were written towards the end of the Vedic literature, Vedic period. I have said when we were discussing about the Vedic portion, polity of the Vedic portion, I said religion of the Vedic portion. Towards the end of the Vedic period, that is by 600 BC, there was a huge resentment in the common people about the domination of the Brahmans, about the discrimination that they were facing, for example, Shudras. So they were completely not happy with the Hindu system of religion. So there was a huge resentment towards the end of the Vedic period, as I have explained. And in that scenario came the Upanishads. So Upanishads were written towards the end of the Vedic period. And they questioned everything. And they condemned outrightly the sacrifices, the rituals which were preached by the whom? By the Brahmanical section, the Hindu religion. Being a part of the Hindu literature, Upanishads, they outrightly condemned the sacrifices. Now, how many Upanishads we had? If you see, we had around 108 Upanishads. So how many Upanishads we had? We had 108 Upanishads in the Vedic literature. 108. Those many Upanishad texts we had. Now the last important point about the Upanishads is very popular phrase about the Indian philosophy, that is the Satyameva Jayate. You might have listened. Satyameva Jayate. So this phrase actually first mentioned in Upanishads. And what is the Upanishad in which this Satyameva Jayate was mentioned? It was Mundak Upanishad. Very important, sir. Mundak Upanishad. Mundak. The name of the Upanishad was Mundak. And in that Mundak Upanishad, we found the Satyameva Jayate. Even that laid the foundation for our till present day India also. This Satyameva Jayate is the inspiration. Yes or no? In the Parliament building, if you see on the top, it was written that Satyameva Jayate. For example, if the lawmakers would see to their top, they would find that it was written on the ceiling of the Parliament that Satyameva Jayate. So that philosophical phrase Satyameva Jayate was belonging to this Mundak Upanishad, belonging to the Vedic period. So this is about the Upanishads. Just a small brief conclusion. Upanishads actually literally means a student sitting before a guru, and Upanishads, they outrightly condemned the sacrifices, and Upanishads were written towards the end of the Vedic period. That's why they show this questioning attitude. And Upanishads are in total 108 in number, and the Mundak Upanishad, which has this phrase Satyameva Jayate. This is the fourth important component of the Vedic literature, Vedic text. Vedas completed, Brahmanas we discussed, Aranyakas we discussed, and now Upanishads we discussed. Now the fifth important component of Vedic literature, that is Vidangas. Let us discuss about the Vidangas. So what are these Vidangas? How many Vidangas we had? What they deal about naturally? So just you see the word Vidangas. Vedas, the root word of Veda was Vid. Vid means knowledge. So now just you split the words Vidangas. Vid Anga. Anga means part. Vid means either Veda or knowledge. So they are also the part of the Vedas. They are also part of the Vedas. So Vidangas. How many Vidangas we had? We had around 6 Vidangas. We have 6 Vidangas. And what are these Vidangas? Let us see. As the name suggests, Vidanga means they are the part of the Vedas. But these Vidangas actually are the instruments to study the Vedas. For example, Brahmanas were written to explain the inner meaning of the hymns. But not only the meaning, but even, for example, to pronounce the hymns, for common people it was a big task. They cannot pronounce easily the words which were composed in the Vedas. They cannot easily understand the grammatical terms. They cannot, so easily, what I can say, you should have some tool to study the Vedas along with the Brahmanas. And that vacuum was filled by the Vidangas. So how many Vidangas we have? We have 6 Vidangas here. Let us discuss about each and every one. The first Vidanga is Shiksha Vidanga. Sir, very important, sir. Shiksha Vidanga. Shiksha Vidanga. What this Shiksha Vidanga deals about? It deals about the pronunciation of the Vedic hymns. Pronunciation. For example, when you were listening that Vedic hymn, normally it was not written composition, I said. It was to be taught and it was to be memorized. When you were to preach, you have to know how to pronounce it. So that pronunciation part, actually to study the Vedas, you should first know the pronunciation of the words. That's why this first Vidanga, that is the Shiksha Vidanga, explains about the pronunciation of the Vedic hymns. Vedic Sanskrit. Pronunciation. Now, the second Vidanga we have is Vyakarana Vidanga. Vyakarana Vidanga. What is this Vyakarana Vidanga? Vyakarana means the grammar. So you should know the Vedic Sanskrit grammar to study the Vedic hymns first at all. So grammar is very important. That's why this second Vidanga, that is the Vyakarana Vidanga, which gives the grammatical domain to the Vedic studies. So it deals about the grammar of the Vedic Sanskrit. This is the second important Vidanga we have. And the third important Vidanga is Kalpa Vidanga. Kalpa, what is this Kalpa Vidanga? For example, whenever you want, you cannot recite the Vedic hymns just like that. You have to pursue the Vedic hymns in certain special occasions only. That was the restriction which was put forward by the Brahmanas. So to every ritual in one's personal life, you will have to recite one particular hymn or some portion of the Vedic hymns. So this combination of rituals and hymns is very important in Vedic studies. That's why the third important Vidanga, that is the Kalpa Vidanga, which explains about the rituals, when associated rituals with which Vedic hymns were to be recited or preached or studied even. So they discuss about the rituals. For example, in today's world, in modern world, if you see, during the Diwali, we will normally listen Kedareshwara Vratakalpa. That means it was the ritual which was destined to pray the Lord Shiva. Just like that, during that particular period, some Vedic hymns will be chanted. So this Kalpa Vidanga explains about these rituals and the associated hymns of the Vedas. Third important Vidanga. And now the fourth important Vidanga is Nirukta. Sir, very very important Vidanga, Nirukta Vidanga. Nirukta. What is this Nirukta Vidanga? Sir, Nirukta literally it means etymology. Etymology, that means, for example, every word will have its own root word. Root word would be there for every word, for every Vedic Sanskrit. So only when in Telugu we call them as Pratipadartha. In Telugu we have already learned them, yes. So in the poetry part, if you have to understand that poem, you should know every root word of every word. So that portion of Vedas, that complexity was simplified by the fourth Vidanga, that is the Nirukta Vidanga, which explains the etymology. That means to every word mentioned in the Vedas, there would be one root word, and that root word will be telling by this Nirukta Vidanga. This is the fourth Vidanga we have. And now, fifth Vidanga we have is Chanda Vidanga. Chanda Vidanga means, it is just like metering. Meter. So this Chanda Vidanga deals about the meter means, what is metering? It's just like, measuring to how many hymns one can chant in particular occasion. So this Chanda Vidanga deals about that particular quantification of the hymns importance, significance. So Chanda Vidanga. And the last Vidanga we have is Jyotishya Vidanga. Jyotisha means astrology. So, to predict the future, what hymns one has to chant during particular occasion. To control the future, to predict the future. To wish for a good harvest, for example. What are the hymns one has to recite? So, this Jyotishya domain would be dealt by the Jyotisha Vidanga. So, how many Vidangas do we have? We have 6 Vidangas. What are they? First is Shiksha Vidanga, which explains about the pronunciation part of the Vedas. Second is Kalpa Vidanga, which explains the ritual part of the Vedas. Third is Vyakarana Vidanga, which explains about the grammatical portion of the grammar of the Vedic Sanskrit. And the fourth is we have Nirukta Vidanga, which explains the etymology, that is the root words for every word of Vedas. And then fifth is we have Chanda Vidanga, which explains the metering of the metering of the hymns. And then the last Vidanga we have is Jyotisha Vidanga, which explains the astrological portion of the Vedas, astrological relevance of the Vedas. So now we discussed Brahmanas, we discussed Aranyakas, we discussed Upanishads, and now we also discuss about the Vidangas. Now what we left with? We left with Smritis, we left with Upvedas, we left with Darshan, that is the schools of philosophy, 6 schools of Indian philosophy, and the last one is epics. So let us study these portions. So right now, after the what we discussed Vidangas, right? So after Vidangas, let us study about the Smritis. Smriti, how many Smritis do we have? So first, what is the literal meaning of the Smriti? Let us discuss about the meaning of Smriti first of all. What is actually this Smriti means? Sir, actually this Smriti, when I say that, is to be memorized, Smriti literature we discussed. But here the Smritis, there are some around 4 Smritis we had in the Vedic literature. And here the meaning, the context of this meaning will change, and here Smriti means rule and regulation. Here Smriti means a rule and a regulation. So they are almost like the rules and regulations of the today's government, just like that. Smritis were written in the Vedic literature. Who wrote this? The Brahmanas. So Smritis are the texts, Vedic texts, which preaches, which tells the rules and regulations of a Vedic life. So every person in the Vedic society, as per the Smritis, the dominant section, who are the dominant section? Brahmanas. So they were saying that everyone in the society were to follow the rules and regulations which were mentioned in the Smritis. So they wrote some Smritis, just like the constitution of today, but we wrote by ourselves. It is the people's will, but they wrote, the Brahmanas themselves wrote for the society. That was the difference between the democracy and it's like a monarchical system. Vedic period, we discussed in the polity that it led towards the monarchy. So people are not writing their own life rules and regulations by their own, but somebody were writing in instead of them. And they are imposing them on the people. So that's what happening in the Vedic period. So Smritis were the text which explains about what? The rules and regulations of the Vedic life. So how many Smritis do we have? Sir, we are in conclusion, we have 4 important Smritis in the Vedic literature. 4 important Smritis. And among them, one is very famous. You might have listened to even in the news of today's debates. Like the first Smriti, very unpopular Smriti, is Manu Smriti. Manu Smriti, in today's media, you might have seen a lot of debates about the Manuvadam in Telugu, Manuvadam. So what actually this Manuvadam? Why Dalits were not happy with this Manu Smriti, and why always the Dalit leaders counter this Manu Smriti? And they say that this is the reason, this is the source of their discrimination. They say like that, the Dalit section, the Shudra section. They say that this Manu Smriti is the source of the discrimination. So the first Smriti is Manu Smriti, and Manu Smriti, it was almost like the constitution. It was about the rules and regulations one has to follow, and between the castes. For example, untouchability, the practice of untouchability was traced to this Manu Smriti, and in the Manu Smriti it was penned down that an upper caste Brahmin and Vaishya Kshatriyas should not touch a Shudra, and they had given the reason that Shudras were the occupation of the Shudras was such that they naturally pollutes. Because they work, for example, if you see the Dalit section, they were to kill the animals and they were to work with the hides of the animals. They were to make some chappals like that. So those sections of the society were considered to be the Dalit section or the Shudra section. Dalit is a new term, the modern term, but in the Vedic period the term was Shudras. So because the Brahmins, whatever the reason put forward by the Brahmins was in justification of caste system, untouchability was that because they were doing a work of pollution, they are normally to get a lot of diseases, lot of infections by transfer of the, for example, many diseases will transfer from animals to the Shudras, because while they are doing slaughtering work, while they are dealing with the hides of the skins, so naturally they get polluted, and that was taken as the reason for the upper caste not to touch them. That was the justification given by the Brahmanas in the Manusmriti, and they said that untouchability was to be practiced. And even their settlements were to be outside of the villages, normal villages. Inside the villages they are not entered, and their entry into the temples and all the Hindu sacred places was completely prohibited. So all these whatever the regressive steps, today's we consider them as the regressive steps. So those, but in view of that contemporary, you should not see those rules by today's frame of reference, because we are speaking about 3000 years back society, sir. So then for the first time society was ordering itself internally, and upon the contemporary situations of that period, these rules came up in the form of Manusmriti. So Manusmriti is the first Smriti of among the 4 Smritis of Smriti literature. Now second Smriti, Manusmriti, was like the constitution, the rules and regulations, and the second Smriti is Narada Smriti. See, the naming of Smritis were actually by the writers of the writers. That means, for example, if a sage composed one particular text, the text will be named after him. For example, Patanjali, for example, Kannada Rishi, etc. You will see a lot many Rishis' names. Just like that, Manu has written the Manusmriti, and then Narada Smriti was the second important Smriti. And what this Narada Smriti actually deals with? It deals with the judicial procedures. Judicial procedures. For example, if something happens in the society, how the law, dharma, the concept of dharma has to be trialed. With the use of dharma, the concept of dharma, they were to trial. That was the judicial process. So those judicial rules and regulations were mentioned in the Narada Smriti. Narada Smriti. Now, the third important Smriti is Yagnavalkya Smriti. Yagnavalkya Smriti. Very, very important Smriti, sir. Because this is the Smriti which explains, which puts the rules and regulations of the customs of the society. Hindu customs. We would have lot many customs. For example, a wife has to touch the feet of the husband on the marriage occasion. Like that, you will have lot many customs. Customs, naturally, every society will have their own customs. And Hindu, on that contemporary period of Vedic period, the customs, whatever the prevailing Hindu customs, the rules and regulations were set by which Smriti? The Yagna Valkya Smriti. Yajna or Yagna Valkya Smriti. So who composed this Yagna Valkya Smriti? The Rishi Yagna Valkya, the Brahmin. And the fourth important Smriti and the last important Smriti of this Smriti literature is Parashara Smriti. Parashara or Parashara. Normally Parashara, we pronounce it as Parashara Smriti. So what is this Parashara Smriti actually talks about? This Parashara Smriti talks about the code of the laws. It is like a compilation of the laws of the society. Laws means they are not democratic parliamentary laws of today. They are laws which were to be composed by whom? The Brahmanical and the Kshatriya section of the society. So it's like the code of the laws. What is the Smriti deals about the code of the laws? It is the Parashara Smriti. Parashara Smriti. Code of the laws. Codification of the laws. So these are the Smritis. What are the 4 Smritis? Manu Smriti, Narada Smriti, Yagnavalkya Smriti, and the Parashara Smriti. So this is the Smriti literature. So these Smritis are the text which explains the rules and regulations, are the 6th important component of the Vedic literature. And now let us discuss the last one of today's lecture, because already it's around 40 to 45 minutes. So we will discuss the last one now, and the remaining two, the last two, like darshan, the schools of philosophy, Indian schools of philosophy, and the epics in the next class. But now the seventh important component of the Vedic literature, very very important component, that is Upavedas. Let us discuss about the Upavedas. So how many Vedas do we have? We have 4 Vedas: Rig Veda, Samveda, Yajurveda, Atharvaveda. And very interestingly, for 4 Vedas, we towards the in the Vedic period itself, at the peak of the Vedic period, we also found 4 Upavedas composed. 4 Upavedas, and they are composed by the most famous rishis of the Indian history. Most famous, especially in the mythology, they are very popular rishis. So let us discuss what are the 4 important Upavedas do we have. Upavedas. For every Veda there was an Upaveda. Let us discuss. So by this we will end today itself by Upavedas, and the remaining two portions of Vedic literature, that is the Darshan and Indian schools of philosophy and the epics, we will discuss in the next class. So Upavedas. So there are, as I have said, there are 4 important Upavedas. For every Veda there was an Upaveda. First let us take the Yajurveda. So in original, Yajurveda deals about what? It deals about the procedure of performing the sacrifices, procedure of performing the rituals. So now my question is, normally when a sacrifice would be performed naturally in the society? Probably maybe before going to a battle, before going to a war, or probably for a good harvest or good monsoon, etc. So it's almost very relatable to whom? Mainly the ruling section. All the rituals will be performed by whom? The rulers, Kshatriyas. So to this Yajurveda, there was a Upaveda which was composed, and that Upaveda is called as the Dhanurveda. So very important, please listen, very important. What is the Upaveda of Yajurveda? It is Dhanurveda. Dhanurveda, yes. So Dhanurveda was the Upaveda of Yajurveda, and what Dhanurveda deals with? It deals with the art of the warfare. The art of the warfare, especially archery. The art of the warfare. And who composed this Dhanurveda? Very important popular sage, and he was Vishwamitra. The Muni Vishwamitra composed the Dhanurveda, which is a Upaveda of Yajurveda, which deals with the art of warfare. Now, the second important Upaveda. The second important, for example, let's say second Veda, Samaveda. Samaveda deals with what? Original Samaveda deals with the melody, that means the music. It was the book on music. So the second Upaveda, which was associated with Samaveda, and that Upaveda is called as the Gandharva Veda. Gandharva Veda. So Gandharva Veda is an Upaveda of what? Is an Upaveda of what? The Samaveda. And Gandharva Veda deals with the art of music and dance. Gandharva Veda is an Upaveda, deals with the music and dance. So who composed this Gandharva Veda? Vishwamitra composed the Dhanurveda. So who composed the Gandharva Veda? It is the Bharata Muni. Bharata Muni, very very important person, sir. Bharata Muni composed the Gandharva Veda, which was an Upaveda of Samaveda, and it deals with the music and dance. And now third important Upaveda, sir, this is very very important, especially for civil engineers and architectures. And this third Upaveda is Shilpa Veda. Shilpa Veda is the third Upaveda, and this is the Upaveda of which Veda? It was the Upaveda of Atharvaveda. So Shilpa Veda, Shilpa means architect. So what actually this Shilpa Veda deals with? It deals with the art of architecture. It deals with the art of architecture. And who was this person who composed the Shilpa Veda? It was, yes, Vishwakarma. He was considered to be the universal architect in the period of Vedic age. Vishwakarma. So Vishwakarma composed the Shilpa Veda. It is an Upaveda of Atharvaveda, and it deals with the art of architecture. Now the last Veda, Upaveda, which was an Upaveda of Rigveda, and very, very most important and very relevant even till today, and that Upaveda is Ayurveda. So what is Ayurveda actually about? Ayurveda is an Upaveda, and it is an Upaveda of what? Rigveda. And what Ayurveda deals with? It deals with the medicine. It deals with the art of healing, art of practicing medicine. So Ayurveda was Upaveda composed by whom? The sage or the Muni Patanjali. Sorry, I am very sorry, not Patanjali sir. I am very sorry. Ayurveda is an Upaveda of what? Rigveda, and it deals with an art of medicine, and it is not, I said it wrongly. Patanjali was associated with the yoga philosophy, yoga exercise, or the yoga text, which was written by the Patanjali. But Ayurveda was actually composed by the Dhanvantri. So this Dhanvantri is the Muni or a sage. Dhanvantri. So this Dhanvantri composed the Ayurveda. I am very sorry, I said it wrongly. Patanjali is for yoga philosophy, yoga text. But Dhanvantri is the sage or Muni who composed the Ayurveda, which was an Upaveda of Rigveda, which deals with the medicine. Now, how many Upavedas do we have? 4 Upavedas. What are they? Dhanurveda, Gandharva Veda, Shilpa Veda, and then Ayurveda. Dhanurveda was composed by Vishwamitra. It was to deal with the art of warfare. Gandharva Veda was composed by Bharata Muni. It was to deal with the dance and music. Shilpa Veda was composed by Vishwakarma. It was to deal with the architectural art. And the last one is Ayurveda, which was to deal with the medicine, and it was composed by the Dhanvantri. These are the Upavedas. 4 Upavedas. For every Veda there was an Upaveda. So what we discussed today, just a small recap, and we will end this lecture today. And what we are left with is only 2 important components of Vedic literature, and they are very important components. That's why I purposefully kept them at the last. And they are Indian schools of philosophy called as the Darshan literature, and then epics, Mahabharata and Ramayana. We will discuss them in the next weekend. So today we discussed the first Veda as the component of Vedic literature. We discussed in last class, and then today we discussed the Brahmanas, Aranyakas, Upavedas, then we discussed the Smritis, then we discussed the Vidangas and Upavedas also. At the end we discussed the Upavedas. And in the next class we are going to discuss about the 6 Indian schools of philosophy. Nyaya philosophy, Vaisheshika philosophy, Sankhya philosophy, Yoga philosophy, Mimamsa philosophy, Uttara Mimamsa philosophy, what those actually philosophies are. And then towards the end of next class we will discuss about the epics, Mahabharata and Ramayana. And by the next class we are going to close the Indian prehistory series. Indian prehistory ends by Vedic period and then starts the history. That is the post-Vedic period, starts by 600 BC. And from now on you will see a lot of empires will come, lot of kings will come, lot of emperors will come. Lot many things we will learn in the history portion of the India. And by next class we are going to complete the first portion of Indian history, that is Indian prehistory. So you just refer all these Vedic literature. These are very important: Brahmanas, Vidangas, Aranyakas, Smritis. Because in every examination also, I am not teaching for examinations, but still for every examination also these are very important. So please go through them. And even at the bottom, in the down comment section and also in the description section, I will attach the class notes of this Vedic literature part 2. Please go through them, and whatever the opinions you have, Please do comment if you have some queries or even the opinions to change my style of discussion, or some changes in my even the content quality also. I don't know, because I'm just giving in one way. If I get opposite comments also, I will understand how it is actually going, whether my efforts are going wasted or whether they are really useful. So please study and be strong, enjoy the life. Till then, thank you.
Thank you.
अथ श्री महाभारत कथा।